Everyone, welcome to another Sales Wisdom podcast. Today with us, we have Mike Reardon. He is CEO founder at beffective.ca. Mike, can you give us a quick intro and tell us about your sales background?
Well, right off the bat, I've got more than 30 years in being a professional salesperson for various companies. So selling other people's products in that time, most of that in the sector of technology and SaaS with products like Salesforce.com. But over my career, I would have to say I've been involved mostly with innovative companies. So way back when at the beginning was stuff like electronic components, hazardous gas detection. And when I came to Montreal, it was companies that were building simulators as an example to help train truckers. And what I've done in the last couple of years, this is my third year, is I'm selling my services and expertise, which is a whole new ball game because I'm selling me rather than somebody else's product. So that's another level of growth.
Yeah, it is. And how's it been so far for you? Like, how's the transition from selling for someone via selling for yourself?
Well, in terms of delivering the services in production, it was founded on Zoom, for example, and I was already accustomed with that from as far back as WebEx and presenting product demos over that. In terms of how the quality of my services, I've had to learn to articulate it at the level of the listener, even more than what I know. So there's been some challenges with that. But I had some good mentors, so the learning curve wasn't as long as it could have been. And we're going into 2023 with a good client base, and I'm already looking at scaling it from there.
What's the difference between sales 20 years ago and sales in 2023 with GPT, with more data, with prospecting tools? What do you feel is the main difference nowadays?
In some respects, I see the internet through to coming on board to ChatGPT as noise, because what hasn't changed is we sell from one human to the next. That's kind of hard to replace because that's at the gist of it. And the level of trust by customers, not only with sales as a profession, but also with technology, is still kind of iffy. And it's part of the process to tell them it's okay. What I believe has happened in the profession of sales is not just my opinion. There's been tons of people that have researched the sales effectiveness, the sales profession overall. One, for example, is right now the name escapes me, but he used to be at CSO Insight, which got bought by Miller Hyman and then by Korn Ferry, who still uses that data. And if the details of the process of sales is not done as well because people use technology as a crutch. So the basic elements of sales is you first have to break water with the person you're attempting to sell to. And what we had talked about before is don't sell them anything, educate them on it. And I'm looking to articulate the simplicity of sales, simple as a relationship with your significant other. You want to see the action movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, and your partner wants to see a romantic movie. A sales situation. Yeah. So you have to sell him or her to, hey, let's go for the action movie, and your partner has to sell you, come on, the romantic movie, holding hands. And so who wins from there? It generally ends up being a compromise, and too many times people think it's a win-lose type of situation, and it should not be, especially if you want long-term relationships with your customers.
Correct. That's such a good analogy because, yeah, romantic movies maybe once a year. That initially was a bit more. I tried. And then when it comes to convincing my wife to watch a movie with me, I try to go where we interlap, right? So sci-fi, let's say, Not too much violence and so forth. But yeah, and then she tries to convince me of like watching horror movies, and I consider horror movies just like media, with these fear creating headlines. It's just like, yeah, it plays with your brain, shouldn't be. So that's a good analogy right there. uh who are you targeting, Mike, as customer?
Well, in a way, you don't really have a choice, because if you start with Canada, let alone the world, small business. Um, they represent almost 50% of any given country's GDP, give or take 10%. That's why there's so much focus on helping them get started. And the president of BDC said it right. We need more medium-sized business to come out of the small business. So I took that as a challenge, because how do you find the small business that wants to grow, that they need, for example, sales, that they get to understand that they got to deliver something from a production perspective of their service or product, and not forget the third element, which has got to do with keeping score, starting with cash flow, which is the number one killer of most businesses. And I can't tell you how many small businesses I've run into that don't know their numbers. And my career wouldn't have been as long as it was if I didn't know mine. So I found that to be a surprise. But you know what? The background is so varied. They're not all salespeople. They're not all, they're from a variety of professions, from blue collar to white collar. Why would they know it? So we need to educate them on that value on all 3 points.
And last time you and I we spoke about my difficulty with working with people that, I mean, it's not non-technical folks, because it's my pleasure to educate folks, but people that don't really value business. So we talk about nurse, for example. A nurse is not really, most of them are not money oriented. They're more about helping, a bit like nonprofits. And me, I need to work with people that understand kind of capitalism and the value of selling. Like, I'm very far away from the right socialist part. So I mean, it might not be the case in your case, but how have you been dealing with that, and the pains of kind of educating someone that selling is human and selling is important?
Well, it's been part of the reason why I haven't taken off like I want to, because I've had to acknowledge that just as much as you have. The, there's not just one variable or cookie cutter approach to that question. First of all, we're coming out of an event that's singularly, in this last couple of years, phenomenal, and it's made people really reevaluate where they want to go forward. And it's not necessarily got to do with capitalism and socialism. It's got to do with the value for my money, if I put my money in there. Second, it's a cultural thing. If you're in the US, it's not an issue. They get it. But now they get into stuff like, okay, well, if you're just starting at this, what can you prove to me? What's the numbers? And they're very numbers oriented. So if I give you a list of 100 people, I'll be able to qualify from your work how many? 10, 20, 30, right? So if you use the historical, your number should minimum be around 20%, but that may be hard to do today, right? And at the end of the day, the customer only needs one. So you have to show them. So culture and geography and macro environment of that customer is the second thing. The third thing is, if it's not to do with where they come from, I can tell you the nurse that I mentioned to you definitely is capitalist, but uh, this is her first rodeo, so she has to figure out how this applies, and she's in a unique area in the case of healthcare, which is a growth sector. As we've seen our one payer system crumbling around us, not only here in Quebec but everywhere across Canada. We can debate on another time, how did that happen? But to me, in a in one sentence, we didn't manage our healthcare system for more than 2 decades. What do you expect? We filled somebody else's coffers, but we certainly didn't help the system to help us. And that needs to be fixed. And these entrepreneurs in healthcare get that, but they're trying to figure out how to make that happen. So the fourth thing is the environment that they're in. Private healthcare is up against public healthcare. They don't want to give it away. So how do you overcome that? And now there's a doctor suing the system to change that. That's how. So I'd like to support those leaders. So I explained to them, did you keep track of your whole network of doctors and nurses and healthcare workers? Yeah, it's in my phone. Okay, well, that doesn't help anybody else in the company. So
Sure.
where are you going to put that? Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I'm also repelled by these niches, if you want, because it has to do with the government and the fact that it's public and bureaucratic and not necessarily something I believe in. I believe that health should be taken in your own hands mostly. And when you have free stuff, you just don't value it. And happens that most people do not value their health. In US and Canada, they eat junk food all the time and they're like, oh, I'll just take my pills, when I need them. It's also a radical way of thinking. So yeah, it's not like how people think normally, but yeah, like me, it's more like biotech or health tech, these kinds of niche. I think we have a nice upcoming scene in Montreal with biotechs and pharma. I've certainly experienced it myself in my first supplement company, and yeah, startup scene in Montreal is doing kind of fine. Are you working with startups as well?
Here and there, but as a rule, I don't chase after startups. Just because they have to start out with the premise that their idea really works. And if I have issues with it, or at least how they go deliver it, I'm the last one to rain on somebody's parade. Go for it. But what I saw from startup on high tech, it's not the approach I would take. The first thing we want to do is a business plan, and the first thing we want to do is get funding. And I know at least 3 occasions where they got the funding, spent the money, have the best place downtown Montreal, and they're gone. Dragon's Den is the best example of what to do with the money, because they don't want to give it to you unless you've made some sales. Guess what? They need you and I. So you need to know, and if you don't need the two of us respectively, then you need to learn how to sell whatever you're putting together. And so that kind of environment is hard to explain to them that this is a key component. It's the front end of your business, sales.
Yeah.
Marketing creates the demand, sales closes it, and you need to close.
Correct. I believe like sales is also interlaced with product because it allows you to get data. Most people don't think that way, but man, just get smarter and smarter, and my product gets better and better because I speak to folks like you, and I speak to sometimes people that are not a fit for my product, but still, I don't bang my head against the wall too much because I still ask them a bunch of questions. I still get feedback from them, and I use that feedback to improve my product. What do you think about this?
Well, I'm in line to some degree, and I'll highlight what I say. When I say I'm a sales professional, I did everything: hunter, farmer, telemarketing, inside sales. That was what a professional did. But over my career, all of those things were broken down because they do represent in an enterprise almost 150 different roles. Same thing in marketing. So what I used when I got to quotas of in the range of 10 million is realize that the sources of leads are across the board. The receptionist that addressed an angry customer call in that nobody addressed. Okay, give me the name. I'll go call them. It's not my responsibility, but I'm going to call them. When you talk about if you're in the telecom and a service guy went out and he's servicing our customer, but he's in a building with 7 other customers and he sees how the other 2 customers next door have a bad telecom system. Guess what? He's a source of leads. And then referrals is the same thing. If HubSpot is to be believed as far as some of their marketing and sales statistics, 84% of reps don't ask for referrals. Hello, you can save yourself a lot of work and avoid cold calls if you want by just that. So that's where I would say some of the changes have occurred in sales. We're not using everything that's available. I showed a technique recently to a sales team. Just check the news. Well, what do you mean? Well, companies are making all kinds of news in PR websites and whatnot. There's your lead. What do you mean? Well, if they're announcing something and that they're having a problem getting that, and your solution will solve it, they'll be more than happy.
True
Some of
that.
the old books, and a current colleague stood up in a meeting and said, my English writing sucks. And I knew where he came from because he had a PhD in English. But long story short, he was accountable for 10 accounts to close. I said the first one to 5 decides what we do in this next quarters of marketing. So I got 4, he got 1. So instead of firing him, which is an opportunity I have as the boss, I had him up front with the Globe and Mail, and I said, could you please correct all the bad grammar on that newspaper? And the newspaper, by the time it was done, was all red. And one of the writers, the main writer on that page, was a PhD English. So I asked, how can a PhD English guy writing for the Globe and Mail have it all corrected by you? Because proper grammar doesn't sell. Ain't right is not proper grammar, but boy, does it ever pick up people's attention when you say stuff like
True.
that. And it's used in marketing all the time.
Yeah.
So when I showed that to them, all of a sudden it changes the dynamics of how they approach a customer, whether it's a
Yeah.
voicemail, whether it's an email, and that's what we need to bring back to sales today.
Yeah. Classic objective fallacy, like this guy's thinking with his lens of like proper and being politically correct while you're thinking in ROI and sales. Yeah, like, especially PhD, I think sometimes they are very narrow-minded. They've been so long in the trenches of their own specialty that they can't really see the world in another way. A lot of researchers and theorists as well.
Mm-hmm.
They've gone so deep that it's really painful for them to go up and go in another tunnel. And yeah, that's pretty much true. Last question for you, Mike. What are you reading nowadays that has changed your perspective on sales?
Well, a couple of years back was the Drive from Dan Pink, talking about what motivates somebody. And he had a TED talk that basically said how we compensate salespeople is completely wrong, and it's eye-opening in a sense. And when I look at what really intrigued me about selling is, hopefully you've noticed that I really enjoy talking to people just in general. I like to hear their stories. Well, when I'm out there on the road and talking, that's exactly what so I'm in their office and I see that they got this big golfing thing, and I say, okay, where have you played golf? Or it's a sailboat and they're a big sailor, or the list goes on. It's really intriguing how people gravitate to certain interests and whatnot, and how they balance their work life. The second one I would say is relates to strategy, and it's a little known Canadian, I believe, Eric Bowden, with regards to creative execution. And he talks at the beginning of the book about Admiral Nelson facing Bonaparte and his Spanish allies. And, you don't need to know much about the 13th century except what you might have seen as black and white movies, but you have two ships coming side by side and they basically beat the shit out of each other. Well, Admiral Nelson only had boats with 2 rows, and Bonaparte had ships with as many as 5 rows. Oh, we can't win that battle. But he did. Why? Because he went at them perpendicular. And what was interesting about that strategy is he's blue blood. So basically, he doesn't need to talk to you or I because we're little people. We have no royalty. So, but there he is sharing his plan with all his captains of his 20 ships. And then he asked his captains to talk to his crew about how this would work. And that is brilliant, book about strategy. It's not the only one I've read because others have reinforced and expanded on that book, but that's would be the second book. And the third one really gravitates from Dan Pinkin. What is management? What is leadership? How do you get people to follow you? And it's certainly not the way we've seen it the last 2 decades. And most recently, just in the news in the past month, is I believe it's a Stanford professor. He put his hand up and said, I think I know the cause of all these layoffs. Because if you look at the US financial standard approach for accounting, people are considered an expense rather than an asset. Ah, well, that could be a good start. We're not an expense business owners, we're an asset. And the sooner you realize that, all the evidence says you will make 2 times more than your competitor currently today.
Love
Wow.
it. Love
I
it. Love
wouldn't
it. Love it.
ignore that,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, it's well, okay. Yeah, I love that all these mental models, and nice to see that you're also a student of histories and war, because yeah, business is still very much like war, and there's not only competition in wars, there's also cooperation. It's really asymmetric, especially nowadays. Um, Studying even Ukraine and Russian war can yield a lot of insights, and yet like I feel that ego sometimes is the great destroyer in business, and thinking you're just better and stop evolving, because it's sort of human nature to just always take things slow and rest up if you don't like force your brain to do a bit more, to do one more, like Ed Milet says. So very important lessons in there. Yeah, I love the insights that you added today, Mike. Thank you for that. Where can people find out more about you?
Well, thank you. I appreciate the invite, and I certainly welcome that we continue our interaction. It's definitely fun. And that to me is at the central of what we got to introduce in 2023. People have not had fun for 3 years. So we need to come and give them from a sales perspective, since we're the first one that they see. Hey, today's a fun day. I know we got 3 foot of snow, but at least you can kick it, you know, or something like that. So
Good
let's
workout.
keep it fun.
Yeah, let's keep it fun. We'll see each other's posts on LinkedIn, and your website is beffective.ca, right?
The letter B and the word effective together. Yeah.
Okay, so just one E,
One
not
E
two. All right, cool.
dot
But
ca.
Mike, thank you so much for showing up today.
No problems. I welcome it. I had fun, and I wish you the best of the rest of the day.